Okay, Unit 3. How has the Constitution been changed to further the ideals contained in the Declaration of Independence? How and why has suffrage been expanded in the United States? Why has the expansion of suffrage been controversial? And how have advocates of expanded suffrage used their rights under the First Amendment to achieve their goals?
In the words of Congressman John Lewis, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most important, nonviolent tool we have to make a difference. The United States has, since its founding, placed a great deal of importance on the citizens' right to vote.
However, this right was never fully extended to all American citizens. As a natural response to this, minority groups throughout American history have come together and utilized their First Amendment rights to progress their standing and ultimately gain suffrage.
The prevailing idea on suffrage in classical thought was that to vote, citizens must have an economic stake in their community. These individuals were believed to be the most likely to cast informed votes and avoid the rule of the masses that the philosopher Plato and many of the founders feared so much. This idea carried over to American colonial society, where voting rights were again given exclusively to property owners. However, due to the remarkable affordability of American land, the number of eligible voters actually increased.
The debate over suffrage proved particularly divisive during the Philadelphia Convention, and as a result, voting is mentioned only twice in the Constitution, in Article 1 regarding the election of representatives, and in the Electoral College enumerated in Article 2. Under the new Constitution, Native Americans have a status comparable to that of a foreign nation, making their suffrage rights incredibly controversial. A similar situation is found in the modern debate over suffrage rights for illegal immigrants and resident aliens. Like the Native Americans before them, these resident alien suffrage rights are constantly being questioned due to their possible standing as foreign nationals, and their protection under the Constitution is still uncertain.
Despite winning freedom, citizenship, and the right to vote through Reconstruction amendments, African Americans still had noticeably little voter participation, due largely to Jim Crow laws which severely inhibited the voting rights. This practice was allowed to continue. Because most states still saw it as their right to deny or allow the vote, an issue at the heart of the suffrage controversy, due to the lack of a consensus in states on the matter.
It would take a century before African Americans finally won the right to vote freely with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which banned such tests in any state or political subdivision and further enforced the 15th Amendment. This came about due in large part to resistance such as sit-ins, nonviolent protests, and church meetings, which were protected under the First Amendment rights to speak, assemble, and petition the government freely. The ability to assemble freely proved vital to the African American push for suffrage, as well as the later women's suffrage movement.
A clear demonstration of this occurred at the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, when suffragists rallied behind leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and penned a declaration that held that all men and women are created equal. This paved the way for the tsunami of suffragists that would flood the political scene 70 years later. Gaining momentum from the disappointing ruling in Minor v. Happersett, suffrage leaders actively lobbied the new, more progressive administration. In addition, as the nation prepared to enter World War I, the lack of women's suffrage made the plea for universal democracy far less legitimate.
In the words of famed suffragist Alice Paul, "We women tell you that America is not a democracy. Not when 20 million American women are denied the right to vote." The continuous petitioning and lobbying of the suffragists, coupled with the American pursuit of liberty, ultimately resulted in the creation of another right, the woman's right to vote. The Article 1, Section 4 guarantee allowing states to decide the times, places, and manners of holding elections has proved particularly relevant in this past election cycle. Voter ID laws in states such as Pennsylvania and Alabama have created controversy with their limitation of citizens' voting rights and their similarity to literacy tests. Also, since 1978, the state of Nevada has included an option on the ballot that allows voters to cast their ballots in favor of none of the above. The intent behind this measure was to expand the vote as a means of expression to encompass the right not to vote for any candidates, demonstrating how this precious right has evolved along the perpetual journey of working to form a more perfect union. Thank you.
Is voting, in your opinion, a fundamental right? If so, then how do we justify denying anyone the right to vote?
Voting in and of itself is not necessarily a fundamental right. It is a privilege that has been afforded to various citizens throughout our history, which is essentially how we justify not allowing people under the age of 18 to vote, or in certain states, felons.
I'd have to disagree with my colleague. I would say that voting is in fact a fundamental right. The ability to have a voice in one's government and how one is governed is so important, in fact, that I think it just goes with the definition of fundamental, and it should not be limited by the government, which is formed by the people.
Okay. Could America's constitutional democracy survive without political parties? Why or why not?
It absolutely could to a certain extent. The parties that we see today and the way that they affect our political process are incredibly negative. We have a huge gridlock in Congress. We are unable to get anything done, and we move closer and closer to the fiscal cliff because our parties are unable to work together. However, on the other hand, a moderated party system really allows us to have both sides of an argument heard and allows us to reach a compromise that's going to be in the best interests of everyone involved.
I think under the new Constitution, political parties are necessary. David Hume, who was a political philosopher, basically said that political parties are inevitable.
I'd have to say that political parties actually limit the choice that we have, especially during something like primary, in which you're basically limited to the candidate that most appeals to the extreme ranges of your party. And that can be an issue, especially when we get into the general election. We saw this during the most recent presidential election, in which the voters were forced to choose somebody like Mitt Romney, who had to subsequently get right back to the middle. And that proved to be probably his biggest challenge that he had to overcome.
Okay. Should we have a test before people vote?
Well, the immediate connotation of a test is, of course, a literacy test, but I'd say it doesn't have to necessarily look like a literacy test. All that it has to do is make sure that there's a basic comprehension. I read a statistic right before this most recent election that said one of the top searches on Google was who is running in this election. Now, I just don't believe that we should let these people decide who should be leading our nation, because there should be that basic level of comprehension.
Additionally, I think a test is necessary because it allows for informed voting. Because the biggest issue to me is uninformed voting. 18-year-olds, half of them barely know the candidates and their policies. So I think a literacy, well, not a literacy test, but a test for the election would be a good thing.
However, on the other hand, a test would persuade voters not to vote because no one likes taking a test, first of all. So voters, we would get a less voter turnout if we do have a test, and the turnout is already pretty low to start with.
There's a reason that we have so many laws prohibiting tests like this. And that reason is because it's historically been shown to really disadvantage those in the lower socioeconomic bracket. Those who don't have the same access to resources, be them the news, the internet, or just general education, are going to be far less likely to be able to pass these tests than those in a higher socioeconomic bracket who do have access to all of these resources.
John, I want to follow up with you in particular, because you've answered two questions in a way that I can't put together. You first said that voting is a fundamental right. You have then said you believe that we should have a test in order to vote. Can you put those two thoughts together and harmonize them for me?
Okay. I'd say the reason I think that voting is a fundamental right is because the nature of having one's voice in the government allows you to really make sure that the government is not running away. But at the same time, I think you should be making informed decisions. So the test would be a way to enforce those informed decisions and further uphold the fundamental right of voting.
So, if we do that, how do we reach out and expand our voter base? This year, Nevada experienced a very big increase in the percentage of people who voted. But how do we expand our voter base? And if we do that, do we get people who know what they're voting for?
Well, I'd say something like this class is actually perfect for expanding the voter base. This all starts with the young people, and I've just taken this class, I've experienced so much more of the political process than I thought I ever would. I mean, before I was a little bit turned off to the whole thing, so definitely I'd say making sure that you take those civics courses in high school, and even getting people like our audience engaged is just helpful in expanding the voter base.
In addition,
I was going to say, Casey, what do you think?
I'd have to agree. You need informed voters. To get more voters to vote, I would prefer a less of an argument with the candidates. Like all the negative campaign ads, there's so much phone calls that people get. They're persuaded not to vote because they get annoyed by all of the negativity that's put around them.
We'll go ahead and stop there. Feedback.
I'll do one. Christina, I thought that it was really great. During one of your answers, you cited a reference, and that really helps when you are trying to make a point. If you can cite something, there was another part that you used a statistic about half of teenagers don't know, and so if you could find some kind of a statistic for that, it would really help your case.
Okay.
So good job. I like that one.
Along with that, John, when you said, like, I read a statistic, like, last week that sounded awkward, how you kind of phrased that, it felt like, oh yeah, I was just kind of, rather than being really informed and knowing what was going on. As you transition through your different parts of your testimonial, you want to be a little slower to then keep away from the stumbles from when you transition from one person to another.
You have given your testimony so many times now, you've practiced it, that it's rote for you, and you're reading, and when you do that, you actually speak quicker, and sometimes you speak so quickly that it's difficult to keep up with you. So when you're giving your testimony, you need to slow down. It may even feel artificial, but slow down so that people can absorb what it is you're saying, because what you're saying has merit. What you have said in your testimony makes sense, and you've got great backup for it. You're using good evidence, but you need to slow down so we can hear it. Another thing, it was, I think, John, you used the term tsunami of suffrage. That was excellent alliteration. That's good language. I loved that. And you played well off each other. Just make sure that everybody gets to play. Casey, I had to kind of draw you out. You need to be there. You've got great stuff to say. Let us hear you. John, I pushed you. I pushed you hard. But you had an answer for me. That's what you need to do. I think everybody did a very nice job.
Well, first of all, you guys did excellent. Yeah, great job. Again, with the slowing down, you guys slowed down a little bit as you went, but the first round of the talking, think about emphasizing your points and differing your inflections, okay? Also, John, work your eyes. Work your eyes a little bit more, okay? And I just had a curious question because two of you had your stuff flat, the other two were holding, and I'm just thinking for uniformity, you know, decide on what you guys want to do on that. Okay, but excellent job.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Very nice job.
John, good job.